Hi, everyone, and welcome to We Don't Want Pool Tables, a webinar on generations and workspaces from Abbey Research. I'm Kristen Donnelly, the Executive Vice President and founder of Abbey Research, and I'm joined today by Erin Hinson, our Vice President of Research and Development. Say hi, Erin. She'll be joining us in a few minutes. I'm going to kind of walk us through where we're going in this half an hour, and then Erin will be back to talk about where she's going to jump in at the end. So, to kind of give you a roadmap of where we're going. First of all, we're going to talk about the vocabulary behind like the words millennials, workplaces, what this all means. And then I'm going to kind of come back, and Erin's going to take that for us. And then I'm going to come back and talk about like the 3,000-foot view of kind of what this means for the culture in general. These are all questions that we face with our clients all the time. And so we wanted to be able to kind of help you understand why we're even asking these questions. Then Erin's going to deep dive into some of our actual data findings. And then we're going to leave a little bit of space at the end of this video for folks to ask questions and for anything else like that. And also just for some silent space for you to think about the questions, as well as give you some contact information to be able to get a hold of us as you process this information later. So to give you a little bit of background on us, like I said, we are Abbey Research, and we are a concierge research company. And what does that mean is that we do projects that our customers ask us to do to help them answer questions that they have. We investigate culture for organizations. We help leaders lead with intention. We do all sorts of things that help people think about what they are and what they can be and how they can think and how they can function in their organization. We are both, as Dr. Erin Hinson will cover in a few minutes, we are both millennials, but we are at the top end of the millennial spectrum in our mid-30s. And we are very frequently in conversation with CEOs and HR managers and even marketing directors and folks who are in a multiplicity of generations who are looking at us and saying, we don't know how to make all of our generations get along. I am also part of the management and leadership team of Abbey Research's parent company, which is my family business, where I work with my father and my brother. And we talk frequently about the differences in generations. My father, who is in his mid-60s, says all the time that the differences between him and his father's generation were nothing compared to the differences between my brother and me and him. And we work very hard to overcome those and have conversations. But all of our ability to work together is because of intentional communication. And he asks us questions all the time about, is he making an assumption in this category about millennials, or is he right? And one of the things that he would say frequently was things about stuff, the fancy schmancy stuff, he would call it, that millennials want in workspaces. And that's one of the reasons we called this We Don't All Want Pool Tables, because Dr. Hinson and I had a hunch that not everyone wants to work for Google. And not everyone in our generation is looking for massage tables to use on the lunch break, et cetera, and kind of these other crazy things we hear. Most of us are looking for other stuff. So we had the privilege of having an intern with us last fall, and she helped us ask that very question, is our gut instinct right? Or is the stereotype right? And we're going to get into that now. Dr. Hinson is going to come back and tell us all about exactly kind of what the language is as we use to even frame this question. Because as researchers, by the way, we never ever start asking questions before we figure out exactly if we know what we're talking about before we ask the question. So she's going to unpack that for us now.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Donnelly. I'm Dr. Erin Hinson. Dr. Donnelly is in our Philadelphia base today at the manufacturing company, and I am in our Pittsburgh base. So I'm going to be talking about these 4 questions that are up on the screen right now. And so the first question is, why study age? Why is this a significant factor when you're looking at workplace environments? So the Pew Research Center, which does a lot of research into generational differences, argues that the 2 things you can learn about an individual by looking at their age are their place in their life cycle, so where exactly they are in their life, and also their membership in a cohort group. of people who were all born at the same time. So that's exactly what a generation is. They are one of those group cohorts. So what are generations is the next question. They are age cohorts that cover usually a 15 to 20 year period. They're grouped by demographics and societal change and impact. So they look at issues that might impact them in a given generational period, and then also the impact that they're making on society as they enter into adulthood. So currently we have the silent generation, the baby boomer generation, Generation X, and our millennial generation, which is sometimes called Generation Y. So what are millennials? Great question. We talk about them all the time. What does it mean? They are the age cohort born between usually 1980, 81, and the mid-1990s and the early 2000s. The name means and came about because they are the first group cohort to come into adulthood, to come of age in the new millennium. So really what you're looking at is people who graduated high school starting in 2000, 2001, which is right in Dr. Donnelly's and I's wheelhouse as we graduated in 2001. So we're at the top end of that spectrum, as she talked about. They are the children of baby boomers, and they're also this Generation Y reference. They were pretty much, I think from what I found, millennials dates back to the late 1980s as a generational term, but Gen Y was popular for a long time, and recently the man who came up with Generation Y said, you know what, everybody's accepted millennial, stop calling them Generation Y. But that just gives you a little bit of insight into how tricky it can be to look at generations as well, because these names and time periods change all the time. So the age of millennials in 2015 ranged from 18 to 34, which is a huge age difference. Dr. Donnelly and I in 2015 were 32, so at the top end. But there's lots of smaller group cohorts that can break up into a generation as well, which Dr. Donnelly is going to touch on. As of 2016, they were 75.4 million millennial Americans. They are now the largest generation in the country, and also the largest generation in the workforce, which makes a lot of sense to start looking at how they're impacting the workplaces they're entering. So they have more, they tend to have more liberal social values. They grew up in this age of the technological boom, as we're all aware. And because of that, they have shaped the demand for and the use of social media platforms. So the image I had up on the slide there was of the Time magazine cover from 2013. They're called the Selfie Generation, the Me generation. A lot of critiques come from the baby boomers against millennials. They like to call them lazy, entitled, and narcissistic, which we've all heard argued a lot. But millennials have also combated that criticism by talking about economic issues, the crash that happened in 2008, 2009, a student loan, high student loan debt that is increasing with each group in this generation as well, and a lot of other socioeconomic factors that they blame on previous generations. So we've been inundated with all of these articles about avocado toast and ping pong tables. So we wanted to take this time to look at the difference between these kind of pop culture ideas and expectations and perceptions of millennials and what they actually want. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Donnelly to talk a little bit more about their emotional understandings and expectations.
Thanks, Dr. Hinson. So in sociology, my training is as a sociologist, Dr. Hinson's is as a historian and anthropologist. And in social science in general, but in sociology in particular, we talk a lot about a book written in the 1960s by a guy named Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N, if you're looking for it, called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And one of the things that he talks about is how revolutions happen, emotional ones, not like the American Revolution, not like Alexander Hamilton revolutions, but like cultural revolutions. And he talks about paradigms, which is a word that I know business folks use all the time to the point where a lot of folks don't even like using it anymore, but hear me out, just give me some patience. So if you imagine a paradigm like a bubble, and paradigms are kind of bubbles that touch each other but don't interact. Revolutions happen when something agitates so much that it pierces the bubble and brings another bubble like bubble B into bubble A because something pierced bubble A's membrane. Okay. What we're going to argue for you in this millennial conversation is that we're not just looking at a generational shift, we're looking at a paradigmatic shift. So there's been agitation at the edge of the American cultural and especially the American workplace bubble for many years. And it just so happened to burst at the exact same time that millennials were coming into the workplace. And what that agitation has been is a shift towards an absolute value on authenticity and being involved and valued in the work that you're in. So when we move away from Gordon Gekko in the 1980s and greed is good and all of that stuff, and the kind of, oddity that was the 90s in terms of business, there was the dot-com boom, but there was all this Y2K stuff and no one really knew what was going on. Where American workplace culture has landed is that, as we say, authenticity is the new watchword. People want to be listened to, they want to be valued, and they want to believe that they matter to your workplace, that they're not just a body. So this is primarily being driven by millennials because they are the newest and loudest voice in the workplace. They're the ones that we're hiring at a higher rate than some other generations. But this authenticity watchword is major. And before we unpack this a little bit more, I know we've got some folks watching that are parents, and they may be thinking like, oh, well, I know millennials, I'm raising teenagers. And I want to hit time out on that real quick, because you may not have heard Dr. Hinson's, the end of the spectrum that she talked about for millennials because there was so much information. So I want to circle back to that. Teenagers and college students currently are in a different generation that people are calling Generation Z. It's different. And there are different expectations that has a lot to do with tech and a lot to do with being raised in a hyper digital age versus an emerging digital age, et cetera. But if you are thinking the word millennial and transplanting a current 16-year-old onto it, I would ask you to stop and instead transplant a current 28 or 27-year-old onto it. That's kind of where we're looking at. So just shift your thinking a little bit. I know we are both still connected to university culture, and we have college professor friends who are telling us that they've even seen a shift in the last couple of years between teaching millennials to teaching this Generation Z and what that looks like. So just be aware. But one of the common features between millennials and Generation Z is that they value authenticity. So what does that mean for workplaces? It means that the folks that you're going to be interviewing are going to be pretty interested in your company cultural statement. They're going to be really interested in your cultural values. They're going to be particularly interested if you give them days off to do charity work, for instance. Do you have a cultural ethos within your company that means that you're an ethical company? Where our parent company is a manufacturing company, and we're getting more and more and more multinationals coming to us and asking for our ethics statements on how we manufacture things. And we have been manufacturing ethically since we started, but we certainly had never written anything down about it because no one cared before. We held ourselves to a higher standard than the marketplace did. And now the marketplace is catching up to that. They want to know, can we guarantee them that our stuff is free, is fair trade? Or can we guarantee them that our stuff we don't use child labor, our suppliers don't use child labor to harvest trees, things like that. And we've been having those conversations with our suppliers forever because it was important to us, but it's only been about the last 5 years that the marketplace has been particularly concerned with that. So employees are going to be particularly concerned with that too. If you have a company culture that you're really, really proud of because it values things like vulnerability, authenticity, balance, self-care, a lot of the other buzzwords of life right now, that needs to be part of your marketing strategy to get and retain new employees. If you are a company that still really, really values, 70-hour weeks or not letting people get off for family care, if you, for instance, do not have a maternity or a paternity policy, these are things you should be aware that new employees, especially those under the age of 40, are going to be particularly interested in. And so if you don't have them for a reason, you should know that reason. If you don't have them because you've never gotten around to it, now is the time to get around to it. So if you understand that the foundation of this entire conversation is the idea of authenticity and being valued, and authenticity honestly just means allowing people to be themselves. We're not saying that then everybody gets to be, you know, who like a total jerk or whatever. If you're authentically a jerk, then there's other problems and you should fire that person anyway. But authenticity is not fitting people into existing boxes. It's allowing roles to evolve around people. So if I hire somebody in customer service and they're good at customer service, but you know what else they're really, really good at is website design. But I've got somebody else on tech who I normally have doing website design and they don't really love it. Authenticity is looking at the customer service person and saying, hey, do you want to take lead on the website? I'd love to see what you could come up with. This is the kind of thing we're talking about. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Hinson for a little bit more of the nitty-gritty findings of what we're looking at here. And I've pulled up her slide already so that she can be able to talk you through it with this visual of what's going on. But as she's talking about the data, I want you to remember what I said about being grounded in authenticity, and I'll see you in a couple minutes.
Great, thanks so much for that unpacking job that you did there, Dr. Donnelly. It really is a complex mix of issues that come into understanding even the ends and beginnings of generations. So that was really interesting, and I hope everyone thought so too. So as my slide indicates, I'm going to be talking a bit more about the specifics of office design. And I'm going to be doing this from both macro and micro perspectives. And just to explain what I mean by that, macro is kind of what Dr. Donnelly just did, kind of the big picture issues facing maybe what millennials might expect or want to see in office design. Micro level issues are the nitty gritty details, like those interesting light fixtures on the left-hand side, or pool tables, ping pong tables, etc. So Dr. Donnelly talked a lot about this heightened sense of individualization that comes with this need to be authentic and to be valued. So I'm going to be looking at how that sense of individualization, if it does, translates to office design, which is a really kind of interesting correlation. So our research project that took place last year set to answer what millennial job seekers, particularly at the tail end of the millennial spectrum, if you will, so 1 year or less out of college, what they were looking for in office culture and design. So a lot of what we found from our research was what Dr. Donnelly just told you about authenticity and ethics and being valued and appreciated for what they can bring to an office environment. So our research was conducted by our wonderful intern, Maria Stoika, at the College of New Jersey. We had 16 total participants, which might not sound very big, but it certainly was, we feel, an adequate sampling of the students that went to this particular university in northern New Jersey. So we realize it's very specific, but we're kind of extrapolating some of these findings to make broader points about millennials. So out of these 16 participants, we did 9 one-on-one interviews and 1 7-person focus group. And Dr. Donnelly talked about kind of the emotional expectations of leadership and accessibility that millennials will be looking for. So on my slide, talking about office design, the image on the left, which some of you might think looks really awesome and some of you might think it looks like it's gonna make you anxious, is from the new Google headquarters in Dublin, Ireland. So this on kind of the left side of the screen this is what people tend to think, pop culture wise, what millennials want in terms of office design. Do they expect this image on the left-hand side, the Google headquarters? On a macro level, on a big picture level, most of our participants knew that they were starting out at the low end of the proverbial ladder, if we still want to use that metaphor for our careers. So based on their work experiences and their internships, they did have opinions on office design, but they also felt that their opinions shouldn't necessarily outweigh the ones of workers who had been in office environments for a while. Because of this heightened sense of individualization, though, what we did find, which was really interesting, was that they understand and believe that different people and different types of work require different spaces. So what that means is Maclay Library at Queen's University, Belfast, which is where Dr. Donnelly and I both did our PhDs. And The library opened, I think, in 2010 and was set to meet the diverse needs of the student population. There isn't a lot of extra space outside of the library for students to study, so the majority of undergraduates at Queens studied in the library. So they wanted this space to represent all the different types of work that an undergraduate or a postgraduate student might need to do. And this was really reflected in the way that our participants spoke to our intern about what they might want to see in an office space. They talked a lot about and used the analogy of their own college libraries, the benefits of breakout rooms, conference rooms, meeting spaces, silent work areas, and areas to socialize. They didn't say they had to have pool tables, but they did say it would be nice to have a place where you can socialize, where people can have their lunch that was separate from the workspace. So these distinct workspaces was really what they've taken away from their educational environment, which is not surprising because that's where they're learning how to be workers. So that was the connection they were making in their head. On the micro level, as Dr. Donnelly said, they don't really want pool tables. Some of them said it would be fun if they had gym memberships. Other ones said, you know, that's not really something that I'm looking for. On this macro level, the biggest finding that we got from our research was that they want to see flexible and adaptable office design that reflects the needs of the people working there, which is really what Dr. Donnelly was saying about their emotional expectations as well. Flexible and adaptable, authentic. Their responses did depend on what professions they were going into as well, of course. So we had interviewees that were nurses and architects, and they have different spatial needs than people that are going into HR or marketing. So that was reflected as well in our findings, and I wanted to bring that up as a final note. So our watchword, authenticity, we're looking at flexibility and accessibility in terms of office design. So that is all I have from my end. I'm going to send it back over to Dr. Donnelly to wrap up.
Thanks, Dr. Hinson. So a couple things I want to make sure that we all heard from Dr. Hinson's data, because we are aware that we are saying a lot of things and a lot of things are coming at you. So I want to highlight a couple things. One is that the data set may seem small to you. Sure, we only asked 16 people, but not only are we confident that it's representative of the student body sample, which is what we asked our intern to do, but since she's wrapped up the research, Dr. Hinson and I have been digging through the rest of scientific data that we can find. And what we're discovering is that either no one else is asking this question, or that over and over and over again, the kind of like subsidiary data that we can find completely confirms this, that the watchword for everyone is authenticity, that people are looking to matter, they're looking for co-working spaces, but also private spaces. So if I could summarize everything that we've discovered in the last 6 months that we've really been focusing on, that it would be that your employees want to matter, they want to have space where they work together, and then they want to have doors that can close. That's really kind of it. Beyond that, I also want to highlight this concept that we have been talking about consistently at Abbey Research, which is the idea of energy and introverts and extroverts. So that was not a piece of data that we collected from our interviewees if they identified as introverts or extroverts, but if you've been following Dr. Hinson's online conversation in particular, you know that we are very aware that a huge part of co-working spaces, doors that close, things like that, depends on people's individual energy. And do they feed off the energy of other people, or does the energy of other people drain them? And that's what we call introversion and extroversion. So as you in your company are having conversations about physical space, we would encourage you to keep things like introversion and extroversion in mind. And in the notes to this webinar, there will be a link to Dr. Hinson's course on exactly what introverts and extroverts are, which is called Life in the Hamster Ball. And if you are unfamiliar with those concepts, we can't encourage you enough to take a glance at that course. And the final thing I want to highlight is that generations are amoebas of Jell-O. They are hard to wrestle down, and data, you're going to find that a lot of scientists are going to tell you sometimes contradictory things. Our data is we stand by it, we're really confident in it, and we haven't found anything to contradict it. I'm sure somebody will soon, because that's what data does. So one of the things that we would encourage you to do is to read widely and to interpret appropriately based on your situation. I am very, very confident in telling you you're not going to find anyone who tells you that people don't value authenticity anymore. If there's an individual human that doesn't value it, that's their kind of bag. But the culture of workers currently values authenticity and mattering to the vision of your company. Data about specifics could very well be different. But if you're looking to really engage, hire, retain, and engage top talent in the millennial generation, we cannot encourage you enough to make sure that you're pitching that they will matter, not the body in their desk, in their chair, not just the position that they're applying for, but they as human beings are who you need to advance the vision and call of your organization. If you do that, the sky is the limit. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. I'm going to put back up some of our contact information up here. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, our website. We're kind of all over the show, and we create new content, a cornucopia of content, I always say, every day at least one of those locations. We have blogs, we have quick thoughts, we have social media graphics. We do all of that online, but most importantly, what we do for you as a business owner or as a human resources manager or as an entrepreneur, however you're coming to us from that, is that we help you solve your problems with custom solutions. So if you read anything we've written and you're like, I have no idea how I would make that work in my context, we would love to help you figure that out. So please reach out to us at our website, abbey-research.com, where you can find direct ways to contact Dr. Hinson and I, as well as signing up for our newsletter, which is the best way to make sure you don't miss out on any of that content. In the meantime, we urge you to ground yourself in authenticity, lead with bravery, and we will see you soon. All the best.